it is somehow as if, it's not so much that the hero knows there, but the screen persona, it is as if he acts for our spectator's view. That's what makes it much less desperate and so on. And I got somebody who is highly sympathetic of the film, Martin Amis, made this remark that here, necessarily, the film mystifies the situation. Mystifies it in the sense that, how should I put it, the whole staging, the moment we are in a movie theater, it's that you see, we secretly impute to the victims there, as it were, you see they will be redeemed because they know that they are observed. This is part of our most elementary phenomenological perception. In their very solitude, they will find redemption knowing that we are there. Okay, let me return to my old topics, that we are their big other, there, the viewers. But this precisely is where it's a very good, even theoretical, not only aesthetic question, how to do a film about, how should I put it, the true solitude. You know, because, you know, if you watch, for example, films by Humphrey Bogart, you know that one of the standard scenes of the noir detective is that at the end, he makes a sacrificial gesture, like, you know, this old melodramatic topic of, I do secretly a gesture, helping my enemy even, because secretly I love him or her, whatever, and it's so noble that nobody knows about it. Yeah, but screw it, we know it, the spectators. And it's always inscribed into the situation. It's kind of ontological treaty. In other words, I think quite seriously that the film Is this what in vulgar American is called cock teasing, that you just gave us a little bit and then, or will it work? Will you go to the end as an honest woman? Okay, okay. Thanks very much. Perfect timing, because now I'm at the end of this one. Incidentally, I hope you got my point. Of course, I haven't seen the film, no? United 93, no? I don't have time for such films, no? Just analyze that, no? Okay, so, but nonetheless, again, I'm absolutely, I think that if you ask me, again, to avoid any moral misunderstanding here, that the two heroes of those September 11th event are, for me, these passengers, and I think I even mentioned them in my Welcome to the Desert of the Real, so I'm not now faking it now quickly, and they're the true proletarian heroes, if you ask me. Their story should have been told. The firefighters in New York, who were ruthlessly exploited. You know, it's little known how the very disgusting Rudolph Giuliani, who pretends to be the big hero, you know that then it was a scandal how those who were wounded were not even properly covered by the insurance and so on. They are the true proletarian exploited guys there. So again, I have no problem with this. All I'm saying again is that, yes, I agree with you, it was real, but the film doesn't render that real, which was there. It's very difficult to do it. I mean, that's why, and I wanted to talk later about it. You know, this is the problem that Kieślowski encountered when I will talk about concrete universality more with pornography. Look, if you do certain things which, if done improperly, can bring children, I shouldn't here use the F word, on screen, of course it's real. But the very fact that you act it on the screen derealizes it. So, you know what I mean? It's very difficult to render on screen the real. Somehow, the screen has a certain effect of derealizing it. For example, and this is what Kieślowski got. If you render something directly in a documentary way on the screen, it's no longer perceived as real in its helpless, tragic dimension. It becomes a travesty and obscenity. As we all know, imagine a scene of torture. If it's rendered realistically, we can be properly terrified. For example, a film which I like, but ambiguously. I think it was a little bit overestimated. It's even politically more ambiguous, Syriana by George Clooney. You can imagine an old sadist like me, what's my favorite scene? He deserves it. Beauty, getting too much beautiful women that, you know, when they pulled his nails out, you know. Now imagine that you think you are in a movie, then what, you don't like him, or why were you so horrified? Okay. Then imagine that a camera would approach it, and all of a sudden you would have seen, my God, it's really going on. I claim this would be, it would ruin everything, which is why, to repeat my old joke, sorry, but it's crucial here, this is why we have this big problem with pornography. Again, I know you all know the jokes, but I should repeat it here, the joke. How, if, as every normal human person, at some point in your life, you have the misfortune to see some hardcore pornography, isn't it, what always shocked me there is how impossible, as if some structural necessity prevents it from making, for me, the interesting point was always the story which accompanies it. And how it is as if there is some urge to make this story as stupid as possible. Like, I enjoy them because I like vulgarities. The last one I saw, I love it. It was the plumber comes home and the housewife is home alone and she fixes the hole. And then the housewife tells him, look, I have another hole to fix. Can you also fix that hole? And, you know, but what I'm saying is that the stories are so stupid that I don't accept it that they, who organize the film, scenario writers, can be so stupid. I really claim that there is some kind of silent censorship there. Like, you will see it all at the level of raw sexuality, real orgasm, ejaculation, but the price is that the story will be ridiculized. You can't have it both. Which is why I think that I well know that Catherine Breillat and others in France now are trying to violate this taboo, this choice. But which is why I think it was only a vague some 3-4 years ago, no romance and so on, and withdrew. It's as if this is too much for us. To have a film that would have been, at the same time, realistic in this vulgar sense through hardcore pornography and, how should I call it, emotionally engaging. So what I'm saying, very precise answer to you, is that, how should I put it, in order to have the effect, what Barthes would have called, the effect of the real, in the sense of what we see on stage really affects us in its core, on screen, we must somehow know that it's a fake. There are nice paradoxes here at work. And again, that's all I wanted to say in a respectful way. Okay, now I said there the big other is here, in the sense of precisely when the hero appears to make his sacrifice alone, somehow he's observed. That makes the whole point of it. Now, this agency would have been, of course, the big other. And now I want to develop a little bit this notion. Here we are, because I was thinking about a very stupid question. Some of you approached me, not even here, but on the street after the talk, and asked me a question which annoyed me because it was a good question. I really hate to be asked. I like stupid questions that you can give a straight, which was a very simple one. In what way can, how should I put it, an individual embody the big other? Why is this simple question a good one? Because the point is precisely not to follow the usual path, which is, yes, it's the person who personifies our community, absolute leader, Stalin, Queen, whatever. We always think about this sublime individual who is the big other already in himself. No, I think this is the wrong way to approach it. I think that one of the best definitions of the big other, of when a person embodies the big other, would be a person which functions for us as, let's call it, a protector of appearances. A person in front of for whom we must maintain the appearances. Like when parents say, when the wife or the husband says to her sexual partner, don't this to me, the child our son may observe us. He is the big other. The big other is this, again, agency in front of whom we have to protect appearances. This would be one mode. Then, my favorite one. It's quite, the origins of this, what I will show now is quite vulgar. Yesterday evening, I went to a walk at the only bookstore, this is still the barbarism of London, open, at least of the big ones, after 80s, that I don't like, on Charing Cross borders. But okay, I got there, brief encounter for $5.99, annual characterization. So, you remember, and I will show it now to you, you remember there is a perfect exemplification of big other I mean, we all know the film. I need to, okay. You remember that the same scene is repeated at the beginning and at the end, because it's a flashback structure. Celia Johnson and Trevor Howard, the two, okay, not realized lovers, but lovers-to-be, meet for the last time at a train station, just when they hope to enjoy for a minute their last moments alone. A friend of Celia Johnson comes, a kind of a benevolent but ordinary common woman who prattles, talks all the time, and is perceived as this disturbing appearance, who instead of leaving the lovers alone, disturbs their last moment. She's the big other. If there ever was a big other, this is it. So let's see if this will work.
I must remember that and try to control myself.
Oh, my God, sorry.
Nothing lasts, really.
I'm sorry. I think here. This, okay.
It all started on...
Okay, that's good.
The next Thursday, I went in to Milford again as usual.
I'm terribly...
The next Thursday,
I'm terribly sorry.
The next Thursday, I went in to...
Okay, let's do it properly. Yeah,
Quite a dark horse.
that's the girl that I like. She's... Okay,
When you didn't come.
Well, I popped in.
I'm sorry, but now we are here.
For the moment I went off.
Oh, indeed.
Chap I know getting married.
Very interesting, I'm sure.
What's up with you anyway?
I'm sure I don't know to what you're referring.
You're a bit unfriendly all of a sudden.
Darren? You can't stand here wasting my time in idle gossip, Mr. Godfrey.
Well, aren't you going to offer me another cup?
You can have another cup and welcome when you finish that one. Daddy will give it to you. I got me, I can't.
This is Dr. Harvey.
How do you do?
Would you be a perfect day and get me my cup of tea? I really don't think I could drag my poor old bones over to the counter.
Yeah, please.
My dear, what a nice little man. Who on earth is he, really? You're quite a dark horse. You shall telephone Fred in the morning and make mischief. This is a better luck. I haven't seen you for ages. I've been meaning to pop in, but Tony's had measles, you know, and then I had all that awful fuss over Phyllis. But of course you don't know. My dear, she left me. Oh, how dreadful, mind you. I never really cared for her much, but still Tony did. Tony adored her. And I'll tell you all about that later in the train. Thank you so very much. There's certainly enough milk in it, but still it'll be refreshing. Oh, yeah, no sugar.
It's in the spoon.
Oh, of course, what a fool I am. Laurie, well, I do wish I'd known you were coming in today. We just come together and have lunch. Good gossip. I love shopping by myself anyway. Here's your tray.
Yes, I know.
Oh, aren't you coming with us?
No, I go in the opposite direction. My practice is in Chile.
Oh, I see.
I'm a general practitioner at the moment.
Dr. Harvey's going out to Africa next week.
Oh, that's thrilling.
Let's go. Goodbye.
Goodbye. You'll have to run or he'll miss it. He's going to get right over to the other platform. Talking of missing trains reminds me of that awful bridge at Broadham Junction. You've got to go traipsing all up one side, along the top and down the other. Well, the other day, I'd been over to see Bob's solicitors about renewing the lease of the house. And I arrived at the station with exactly half a minute spare. My dear, I flew. I got Tony with me.
Okay. We survived it. I'm sorry for the mess. But you got the point. The point is that I don't want, to spend too much time, but at the end, we return to the same scene, but shot more from the perspective of Celia Johnson, the terrified woman, and there she uses some nice expression, like, my friend was just talking, I didn't even hear what she was saying, and so on. Now, in the first approach, you experience this annoying friend as an intruder, But I think that's, yeah, no, but I will go immediately on. But okay, we can do this, yes. Images, okay. But I think that if you analyze, we don't have time to do it now, but nonetheless, if you analyze the scene a little bit more closely, you can see that basically she is necessary. She saves the situation. By her first, she functions as a kind of a protective wall, pretending the collapse. Because a little bit afterwards, the moment Celia Johnson finds herself alone, her idea is, let's jump, let's kill myself. She's a kind of a protective wall. In a way, she's the last defense between the two doomed lovers and their suicide even. At the same time, if you read it really closely, you will discover how just before this friend intrudes, their conversation gets very, very nasty and ambiguous. Basically, it is a conversation of what prevents us from staying together? Like, why don't we stay together? There is basically, they don't have, none of them has children, blah, blah, blah. So it is as if this friend, with her intrusion, prevents them from avoiding the unpleasant question and thus retaining the grandeur, if you want, the tragic grandeur of the situation. So you get the point. The point is that she's absolutely not simply an intruder. If she is an intruder, but if you take her away, all the situation collapses. Precisely this tragic vision and so on. And they would just have been a couple of vulgar lovers with no good reason to part or whatever. Without this intruder, I claim, the truth they, the two lovers, Trevor Howard, Celia Johnson, would have to confront is, look, it was nice, but we are both too scared. We don't really love each other enough, so you go to your Africa, I stay here, or whatever. So again, this would be the closest you come to Big Other, because it's literally just this presence of the third. As it is emphasized, nobody even listens what she is saying. But precisely as such, she is intruding older lady, she is a kind of a safety, whatever we call it, safe background. Yeah, okay, so that would be the functioning of the Big Other. From here, now we go to how this very surface of Big Other can turn into the real. I will do what I think I mentioned to you the last time, that I will do with all the pleasurable vulgarity that I can manage. It is Charles Russell's The Mask with Jim Carrey, my favorite one. It's, as you maybe know, the story of a weak common bank teller, again and again humiliated by his peers and women. Then he acquires extraordinary powers when he puts on an old mysterious mask found on a city beach. A series of details are essential to the story's background. When the mask, you will see the mask, is thrown on the seashore, it sticks to a decaying, slimy remainders of a corpse, bearing witness to what remains of the person behind the mask after the person totally identifies with the mask. A kind of a formless slime like that of Mr. Valdemar from Edgar Allan Poe's story of this, when he is resuscitated from the dead. Another crucial feature is that the hero, prior to acquiring the mask, is presented as a compulsive cartoon watcher. What happens to him when he puts on the mask and when the green wooden mask takes possession of him is that he is able to behave in real life as a cartoon hero, dodging the bullets, dancing and laughing madly, sticking his eyes and tongue far out of his head when he is excited, and so on and so on. In short, he becomes undead, entering the spectral phantasmatic domain of unconstrained perversion, of eternal life in which basically there is no death and sex, in which the plasticity of the bodily surface is no longer constrained by any physical loss. Faces can be stretched indefinitely. I can spit out from my body bullets which were shot into me after I fell from a high building, flattened on a sidewalk. I simply reassemble, pull myself together, literally, and walk away, and so on and so on. In the scene that you will see now, if I succeed to locate it, the first, there is a nice bit of irony. You will see that just before the hero, alone watching TV at home, puts on the mask, he watches on TV a pretentious talk show in which a fictional distinguished psychiatrist, Dr. Arthur Newman, as we are told, author of a bestseller, The Masks We Wear, presents a standard vulgarized Freudian theory. Here is a quote. We all wear masks, metaphorically speaking. We suppress the id, our darkest desires, and adopt a more socially acceptable image. But of course, what the film demonstrates is the exact opposite. The id, our darkest desires, are in the mask itself. Far from suppressing it, outside the mask, he is a normal, shy guy. He puts the mask on, everything explodes. So, let us just, if you are religious, pray and hope that this time it will not be so embarrassing. Okay. Again, what I want to draw your attention to is how the moment you put a okay. Let's hope. No, I must say that okay, I'm sorry. Time took. What I propose is that simply, because this is really getting a little bit too... Sorry? Maybe, yes, because, my God, I did nothing. How should I put it? Yeah, I know, but, okay, so, with the hope that it will work, let us go on. I'm sorry, next time I will... This is slightly unexpected. Okay, let me go on. So, nonetheless, commenting. The universe that we enter once the guy has a mask on is inherently compulsive. Even those who observe it cannot resist its spell. There will be, with a little bit of hope, I will be able, I hope, to show it to you, a wonderful scene towards the end of the film in which the hero, wearing his green mask, is cornered by a large police force, dozens of cars, helicopters, and so on. To get out of the deadlock, he treats the light focused on him as a spotlight on a stage. No, you see that? Only idiot here. So it is the situation. Yeah, okay. Sorry. It's... Let's just do it, yes. This is getting... Okay. Obviously, this is okay. I'm terribly sorry. What I wanted to show you, and maybe I even will, is a scene in which the guy then starts to sing an extremely stupid song, which then, as it were, is kind of a Latino seductive song, and the policemen, all the people around him are unable to resist the spell, the stupid spell of this song. They also start to move, to sing, as if they are part of a musical number choreography. A young policewoman is shedding tears. Yeah, but some mysterious thing happened. It started to play, then it stopped, without me touching anything. Probably, okay. I'm sorry, but it started to play and then it stopped.
The Tyler's copy now.
Okay, in between, maybe just to fill in the time, there is another British classic, Michael Powell's and the Red Shoes, which I think works on the same motive but in a different way. There, we don't have the mask. There we have, as you know, the red shoes. This is what I'm talking about. Red shoes as the Freudian partial object, which is undead in the sense that it goes on and on beneath life and death, and it's absolutely compulsive. You know the Andersen's fairy tale on which the film is based. The idea of a girl who wanted to dance, she put on the shoes and wasn't able to stop dancing. The only way for her to survive was to cut off her legs. So the idea is, again, not of an organism, but of what I call in my book, organ without a body. A partial object, which is as such undead. It comes from outside, it's a mask, it's pure surface, which is why characters in movies, in cartoons, which stand for this undeadness, are characters of pure surface. You know, like, they are basically balloons. There is no depth, like you dug a hole and the air goes out. There is no depth. It's pure surface. But precisely this pure surface provides for some kind of a spectral immortality. Crucial here is the inherent stupidity of this compulsion. This compulsion stands for the way each of us is caught in the inexplicable spell of idiotic, excessive enjoyment, jouissance. Like, I hope you all remember this unpleasant experience when you hear some vulgar popular song and the melody starts to haunt you. And you know you are ashamed of yourself, but you cannot stop thinking about it, whistling it silently or whatever. This compulsion is, I think, the best example of what Lacan means by his neologism extimate, like the foreign body in your very intimacy, imposed from the outside, yet doing nothing but realizing our innermost whims. And in this film, The Mask, the hero himself puts it nicely in a desperate moment. He says, it's a very nice formulation, when I put the mask on, I lose control. I can do anything I want. Having control over oneself thus in no way relies on the absence of obstacles. I am able to exert control over myself only insofar as some fundamental obstacle makes it impossible for me to do anything I want. The moment this obstacle falls... What? What? No, it should. Okay, but it's my DVD scene. Okay, I'm more ashamed than you. Okay. How do I now jump into the... Where is the yes function? Maybe I need to stay here. No. I just want to go into the movie. Okay, now I think I will manage and try. But let's stay here for a moment. I don't trust it anymore. You are, I think, this another embodiment of the big other. Let's see.
Okay. It's party time! P-A-R-T. Why? Because I gotta!
Okay, but nonetheless, let's... Okay, nonetheless. Maybe this is enough for the time being. But I hope this works. Okay, sorry, thank you. And again, the point is, very simple. I hope you got it. When the mask, the dead object, comes alive by way of taking possession of us, its hold of us is that of a living dead, of a monstrous automaton imposing itself on us. So that the kernel of our being is out there, this machine of jouissance. This mask is thus the partial object, death drive at its purest, something that takes over the individual with its idiotic superego injunction, because this is, if you want to know what superego is for Lacan, it is this. This superego is what makes the unfortunate policewoman against her will. It's a ridiculous thing, but I like it remember how she even tries to resist it, cries, but cannot help joining in a duet in that idiotic song. It compels us to act against our conscious standards in an obscene way which embarrasses us. This logic of death drive, of compulsion to repeat, as a matter of surface, deployed by Deleuze in his Difference and Repetition, is to be opposed to the notion, which is closer to Bataille, of violent transgression as the act of tearing apart the cobweb of appearances, of forcing one's way into the raw heart of the real. That's, now I'm returning, you remember, to what I was developing, the idea that I was developing at the beginning, that precisely the Lacanian real is not it's not the Nietzschean Dionysiac as opposed to Apollinian. It's not surface of appearances, we violate them, force our way into the heart of darkness, palpitate. No, the real is on the surface. The real is a surface, the real is, how should I put it in Nietzschean terms, the Dionysiac aspect of the Apollinian surface itself. It's a surface starting to run madly in its spectral, stupid compulsion to repeat. So, two things have to be added here, apropos, just to clarify finally, apropos the Lacanian real. So, when you hear about the Lacanian real, again, forget everything about this standard topic of the symbolic structure in the sense of abstract, rational or logical or language coordinate, and then the wealth of reality, all that which escapes language. And even Lacan, he sometimes misperceives real at this level. For example, he even has a notion of it, what he calls la langue, sometimes translated with this stuttering effect as language, with double L. What Lacan wants to say with this, again, newly coined word, neologism, is language in its non-structural, in the formal sense of structure, aspect. All the, what Deleuzians would have called rhizomatic aspects of language beneath its formal structure. Play words, resonances, etc. All these contingent metaphoric links, homonymies, wordplays, and so on and so on. All this, as it were, pathological wealth of language. But I think that it's very risky to follow this path. Because the first thing to be said is that from, even Hegel, now I nonetheless start with Hegel slowly, even Hegel is sometimes misperceived as following this path. The idea is that, at least if you read the cheap pseudo-dialectical materialist in the usual sense of the word versions, then the idea is that in our everyday approach, we perceive objects metaphysically as isolated objects, but the dialectical approach enables us to locate objects into their proper global context, to perceive all the multitude, the wealth of their connections, and so on and so on. I think that it's exactly the opposite which is true. For Hegel, the truly difficult thing is not to break out of abstraction into the concrete network, but on the contrary, to abstract properly. For Hegel, the first task of conceptual analysis is not to see more than you perceive in reality, but to see less, to see where empirically we see all this wealth of features, this, oh, but the situation is always more complex and so on, to see this as a lure, blinding us for the notional determination, which is the only thing which really matters. In this sense, dialectics is a violently reductionist affair. And Lacanian real is precisely this, which is why, again, a little bit of criticism for some of you, if you also like literature, which is why I think that the misfortune of Lacan, and it is, I claim, his worst seminar, it's the one recently published, Le Symptôme, about Joyce. He was finally seduced with this wealth of language as this informal structure of homonymies, workplace, where everything is mixed in a chaotic orgy of resonances and so on. But I think that the whole of Beckett, who is for me the great one, should be conceived precisely as a reaction, we all know, of this almost paternal Oedipal relationship, Beckett, Joyce, Beckett, not seducing, but rather rejecting the advances of Joyce's daughter, what pushes her to madness, that's another story, what kind of a character was Beckett. What I'm saying is that when did Beckett become Beckett? I think when he got it that one has to reject this late Joycean, Finnegan's Wake, pseudo wealth of, like this impossible task of Finnegan's Wake, to write a book which would be all languages, everything resonates in it, and to ask the opposite, the reduction. And it's wonderful for me, the trilogy of the 20th century, of course, is Molloy, Malone Dice, L'Innommable. Did you notice how even the narrator gets, first the story is minimal in Molloy, in Malone Dice. It's even more minimal, just a guy dying. In L'Innommable, finally we get this undead partial object speaking. So, and this is why I think that Beckett is at the same time the writer of minimal difference, not this wealth of, oh my God, this play, that play, and so on, just minimal, some minimal difference, which is, of course, precisely drive. I think Beckett is the true, as I already hinted at here apropos ethics, Beckett is for me the true writer of drive. Drive is this, what you find in the last lines of the unnameable, L'Innommable. I don't know, I know if I can, but I must go on. This abstract persistence. And I claim that ultimately the minimal difference in Beckett is maybe even the difference, why not, the difference between French and English versions. This seems to me very symptomatic, this, as if it's a wrong question to ask, is it English or French, the original? It is as if it's a minimal, it's the same, it's a nice example of minimal difference, the same, but not quite the same. Which is why, as I developed it somewhere briefly in my last book, The Parallax View, which is why my favorite ancient epic narratives are those of Finland, Kalevala, where it's all based on this minimal repetition. You know how their verse functions. It's always repetitive. The same, like the sun is rising in the morning, the sun is getting up, and so on. Literally, everything is said twice. And that's this structure. I think this is again, this is much closer to the Lacanian real. This minimal difference, which is again drive at its most elementary. And this brings us, if you allow me, another improvisation. I cannot resist it a little bit. Let's nonetheless focus on the real today. This is, I think, where, now I will try to do a serious, okay, conceptual intervention into psychoanalysis and Buddhism. This is where I see a difference between, the ultimate difference between psychoanalysis and Buddhism. With all respect for Buddhism, Buddhism effectively does lead us to enact a kind of traversing the fantasy, to overcome the illusions on which our desires are based, to confront the void beneath each object of desire. And also in Buddhism, of course, the very notion of desire, or rather this craving, is drive in a way. Furthermore, what psychoanalysis undoubtedly shares with Buddhism is the emphasis that there is no self as a substantial agent of psychic life. No wonder Mark Epstein, in his book on Buddhism and Psychoanalysis, refers even positively to Lacan's essay on the mirror stage, with its notion of the ego as an object, the result of the subject's identification with the idealized fixed image of itself. The self is a fetishized illusion of a substantial core of subjectivity where effectively there is nothing. This is why for Buddhism, the point is not to discover one's true self, but to accept that there is none, that the self as such is an illusion. You get this nice, almost Hegelian twist. The point is from the false self to the self itself as false, as falsity. One should accept that the self as such is an illusion, an imposture. Or to put it in more psychoanalytic terms, not only should one analyze resistances, but ultimately there is nothing but resistances to be analyzed. There is no true self waiting in the wings to be released. Self is a disruptive, false, and as such, ultimately unnecessary metaphor for the process of awareness and knowing. When we awaken to knowing, we realize that all that goes on in us is the flow of thoughts without a thinker. The impossibility of figuring out who or what we are is inherent, since there is nothing that we really are, just a void in the core of our being. Consequently, in the process of the Buddhist enlightenment, we do not quit this terrestrial world for another true reality. We just accept its non-substantial, fleeting, illusory character. We undergo the process of, again I quote Mark Epstein, very nice formulation, of going to pieces without falling apart. In the Gnostic mode, for Buddhism, ethics is ultimately a question of knowledge and ignorance. Our craving, our attachment to terrestrial goods is conditioned by our ignorance, so that deliverance comes from proper knowing. What Christian love means is that, on the contrary, there is a decision not grounded in true or false knowledge. Christianity breaks with this entire tradition of the primacy of knowledge, which spans from Buddhism through Gnosticism to Spinoza. So again, the stakes here are very precise, and I'm here, unfortunately, on the side of Christianity, where I see also Marxists and others. You get the point that for Hegel, Fichte, Marx, the ultimate metaphysical decision is ethical, practical, is not knowledge. While for Buddhism, up to Spinoza and so on, the wrong choice is always a matter of not knowing properly the truth. There is ultimately, the consequence of this is very radical. It concerns evil. There is ultimately no evil. Evil is simply an effect of, if you want, epistemological mistake. But nonetheless, let me go on with Buddhism. So crucial for Buddhism is the reflexive change from the object to the thinker himself. First, we isolate the thing that bothers us, that causes our suffering. Then we change not the object, but ourselves, the way we relate to what appears to us as the cause of our suffering. What should be extinguished is not the object, but the false view of the self. What had always been illusory has to be understood as such. Nothing, as again I quote Mark Epstein, his formula, nothing was changed but the perspective of the observer. This shift involves great pain. It is not only a liberation, a step into the incestuous bliss of the infamous oceanic feeling, but also the violent experience of losing one's ground under one's feet, of being deprived of the most familiar stage of one's being. This is why the best starting point for the Buddhist enlightenment is to focus on the most elementary feeling of injured innocence, of suffering an injustice without a cause, which is of course the preferred topic of narcissistic, masochistic thoughts. How could she do this to me? I don't deserve to be treated that way, and so on and so on. The next step is then to make the shift to the ego itself, to the subject of these painful emotions, rendering clear and palpable its own fleeting and irrelevant status. The aggression against the object that causes suffering should be turned against the self itself. We do not repair the damage. we gain the insight into the illusory nature of that which should be repaired. So again, with great respect, imagine what a radical ethical position this is, that the ultimate goal is literally to have thoughts which are thoughts of no one, to have thoughts which are not subjectivized, thoughts not spoken or thought from a certain subjective position of enunciation. In what then, now the crucial question, does the gap that separates psychoanalysis from Buddhism consist? In order to answer this question, I think that we should confront the basic enigma of Buddhism, what I think is its blind spot. How did the fall into what in Buddhism is called samsara, the wheel of life, this eternal circular movement of craving, how did this fall occur? The question to be raised is the exact opposite of the main Buddhist concern, which is how can we, the Buddhist concern is how can we break out of the wheel of life and attain nirvana. But I think the key question is the opposite one. It's the question of how did we fall out of nirvana in the first place. Incidentally, we will have time to work on this later. It's exactly the same with Hegel. I think this is the true greatness of Hegel. If you read him closely, you will see that his question is not, are we condemned to live in appearances? How do we know if there is some substantial reality behind appearances? How to penetrate the veil of appearances towards reality? No, for Hegel, as for any good dialectician, reality is out there stupid. There is no problem in reality. The true problem is how do appearances emerge in the middle of reality. That's the true mystery, and that's what should be celebrated. In a wonderful passage, celebrating thought, Hegel says the true greatness of human spirit is not that we can perceive reality the way it is. Every stupid ape can do it. What only a human can do is to tear reality apart. As Hegel puts it, to take something which has no autonomous being, just a property, a sound, something which in reality exists only as a part of more complex reality, and treat it as an autonomous entity. This exploding, tearing apart of reality, this is the greatness of. So again, as I already developed in my books, it's the same point with Marx, as he said. For Marx, the mystery is not the true nature of capitalism. He said bourgeois economy already knows this. The mystery is the appearance. The mystery is why this true essence appears in the guise of the commodity form. The mystery is not beneath appearance. The mystery is the mystery of the very appearance. So again, back to Buddhism. The nature, the origin of the impetus by means of which desire, its deception, emerges out of the void is, I think, the big unknown in the heart of the Buddhist edifice. It points towards an act which breaks the symmetry within nirvana itself and thus makes something to appear out of nothing. Of course, I'm again playing here with quantum physics, its notion of breaking the symmetry. But you see now my point. Of course, the standard, I asked some of my Buddhist friends, and their point is, you are too Western, this is too speculative. Their point is, we don't even worry about this. Our problem is strictly pragmatic, practical. People suffer, we want to help them to stop suffering. But I think, again, that we should insist on this question. Why? Because if our everyday world of phenomenal reality is an illusory world, then the question for me is, again, how does it explode? How does it arise in the first place out of this, let's call it somehow naively, eternal bliss of nirvana? Now, I know what every Buddhist will tell me, that I'm now introducing a duality which is not there. That, you know, this joke, apple is an apple, apple is not an apple, at the end you again say apple is an apple, or rose is a rose. That is to say that for Buddhism, there is no other reality. Nirvana is not the Western mystical notion of you escape out of material reality and enter some transcendental bliss. No, nirvana is exactly the same reality, only perceived in its utter non-substantial character. You don't go anywhere. The universe remains the same. But nonetheless, I claim, the question is, so how did this, how should I call it, epistemological mistake occur? I think that Buddhism has to avoid it, because the only way to answer properly this question, now I will show you openly my unashamed Western Eurocentrism, would have been to accept something which I think only the Western mysticism was truly ready to think to the end. It's the idea that it's not, there must be some terrifying radical evil located already into the, how should I call it, pre-phenomenal world of nirvana itself, of shunyata, of the void. That, you know, it's not simply the void and then false appearance of our illusory material reality. This reality emerges when something goes, okay, to put it almost ironic now, in the terms of Star Wars, no? The disturbance in power, how should I put it? No? That up there in nirvana something must go wrong. And now comes my point. Drive is the name of this, the Freudian drive, I claim. Freudian drive is not phenomenal. Freudian drive does not mean, oh, you idiot, you cannot enter the eternal bliss of nirvana, you fall. Freudian drive means some kind of a asymmetry already in this. I'm consciously using these big metaphysical terms, in this a priori void of nirvana itself. Here I come back to the metaphor which, as you know, I've already used, this Higgs field. The idea is that in the space of nothingness, the way Buddhism defines it, if I understand it correctly, that in that space there already is always a certain minimal disturbance asymmetry, which is not yet the asymmetry of our ordinary phenomenal reality. And here, with all my debates with Derrida and so on, I claim that in a way, which is why I prefer early Derrida to later Derrida as I developed, that there is more indifference than this late Derridean ethical justice, infinite justice, and so on stuff. It's precisely this idea that, how to put it, the zero level of reality, and I use this term now in a totally naive way, the true reality, is this kind of a minimal disturbance. And this disturbance, this sense that it's not yet desire, it's just that it turns around, it persists, it goes on. Think about the last line of Beckett's Innommable. The way I see it, this, maybe I'm terribly wrong, because on the other hand, I am fully aware how, at least in some versions of Buddhism, of course, I know, I've read it when I was young, all those Tibetan books on the dead and all those evil demons and so on and so on. But nonetheless, I think that to think again at its most radical dimension, this, how to put it, minimal disturbance in the domain of nirvana itself is what, because if you take this seriously, again, then the whole problem turns around. It's no longer a problem, how can we break out of movement into this eternal bliss and so on and so on. The true mystical experience is the experience of how this balance is disturbed, which is why this brings me even to political conclusions. You know, Star Wars 3 and this, I mean, my dream, as I put it in my last book, is to remake Star Wars, but with a total perverse shift of perspective. Basically, it's the story about good, egalitarian, progressive emperor with his great helper, Darth Vader, against decadent, feudal, those knights, and so which should be crushed to establish egalitarian unity. I mean, to remake it from the pro-emperor side, no? It's just, for me, just reactionary, feudalist, separatists resisting progressive dictatorship, if you want. No? Okay, but that's another story. Yes. What I wanted to go on a little bit, which is why nirvana is so strange, I claim, to the principle of nirvana to Freudian death drive. And again, even Freud is here often confused. That drive is not nirvana. That drive is precisely that which disturbs nirvana. That drive is something that the wheel goes on turning, Costa put it. And that's the fundamental lesson of Lacan, when he says, even after you transgress the fantasy, this is for me the ultimate, I know I'm minimalizing it, distinction between Lacan and Buddhism, with all great respect, again, for Buddhism, that after you traverse the fantasy, or to put it in Buddhist terms, after you see the illusory nature of our desires and so on, the Buddhist result is then you find peace. For Lacan, it's no, it still moves. It still moves. It's not peace. And what still moves, even after you traverse the fantasy, what still moves is drive. Which is why I think one should be here Eurocentrist, even at a different level, for example, at the level of incest. In his interesting book, Jean-Joseph Gou, about Oedipus, shows the exceptional nature of the Oedipus myth. Okay, among other things, this concerns what? Recently I read, I don't know which, I think the 1001 Night. I think you call it here, following your imperialist translation, the Arabian Nights or what, no? To put it like Sherlock Holmes, I want to draw your attention to the curious accident which occurs on 614th night. Whence Judar, one of the heroes, follows the order of an evil magician, and when confronting his mother, has to basically force her to undress herself and rape her. Okay, he cannot do it. When he finally does it, the moment he should have gotten the naked mother, the mother dispels, disappears, and he sees it's only an evil spirit. Now, many critics of Western Eurocentrism like to point this out as the example of the greater wisdom of the East, although in this case it wasn't even the East, and we will talk about this later next week. I want to do a friendly, not opposed, I think it has great critical potentials, reading of Islam. The critical idea came to me through reading recently Claude Lévi-Strauss' Triste Tropique, where he in a pure way formulates the true Western prejudice, which is not anti-Orientalist, but on, you know what, it's a violent anti-Islamist outbursts. It's really sustained by kind of a vision of sexual harmony. In other words, Islam is responsible for non-existence of sexual relationship. Why? Literally, his claim of Lévi-Strauss is that we in the West are masculine. The true Orient, back there, is feminine, maternal goddess and so on. Although, okay, where is this feminine? That's another question. That's his vision. And for him, the history should have happened as a big reconciliation between East and West, masculine and feminine principle. The West should rejoin the Eastern maternal embrace, and for him this could have happened. He goes, Lévi-Strauss, through all this New Age rubbish, already Christ is a feminine figure, blah, blah, blah. We were already on the way when the stupid Islam intervened. Islam is for him the utmost evil because he really constructs an incredible image of Islam as a kind of a evil embodied, because for him it takes the worst from both worlds. From the West it takes this imperialist aggressivity, from the East this whatever, irrationality, whatever, so that this is the obstacle. And he ends up with this dream, maybe, like, it's a nice idea, Lévi-Strauss as George Bush's big ideologist or what, but then if we just erase somehow Islam, maybe the East and West can unite. So this would even throw a new light into how the problem that I always had with Edward Said, Orientalism. And when I met him the last time, I loved him nonetheless. Because for me, you can be a fascist, you can be a racist, whatever. But if you like Richard Wagner, you are redeemed. No, so there was not a problem. But I told him nonetheless, but listen, what you constructed as a critical object of Orientalism, it's not really Orient, it's Islam, which was precisely all the time the mystical in between, the wall uniting, but at the same time separating the West from, let's call it, the true East or whatsoever. And these phenomena are always the most interesting. These phenomena which for us in the West are East, for those in the East are West. It's the same like, I find this so fascinating in Russia. You know that for Stalinism, Western Marxists, in a typically, here I am totally anti-colonialist critical, Western Marxists in their arrogant way like to attribute Stalinism to the traces of Oriental Asiatic despotism. No? Even some Frankfurt School people did it, Wittfogel and so on. The idea is that since there was this historical contingency, misfortune, that the first revolution was in Russia. Russia wasn't really part of the Western civil society, still marked by the Oriental despotic functioning. So this is why. So we attribute it to Oriental Asiatic principle, if you want. But you know what's the utmost irony? Is that for old traditional Russians, Stalinism, on the contrary, belongs to the line which began with Peter the Great. It's precisely the violent westernization. So I love this, how, you know, the same, from each perspective, the same intruding element belongs to the opposite side. It's the same paradox, but I still don't like the film, with Rashomon. You know, we in the Europe celebrate Rashomon as the big discovery of Japanese Oriental spirituality, whatever, Venice Festival 1950, 51, I don't know when. But it's interesting to read in good cinema histories that, you know, at least in the one I read, it's claimed, and since I like the theory, it must be the truth, okay, that in Japan, the film was a failure. You know why? Rashomon. Because it was perceived as Western, too Western. Isn't this wonderful that the very film which was for us, the discovery of Oriental spirituality, was for them too Western. So here, but we don't have time to do it, we should complicate things a little bit. Okay, but to return to this, even Islam, the idea is the following one. The wisdom of the East, even of the Islam, is that they know that the incestuous ideal is in itself impossible. When you get the mother disappears. So it's not only a matter of prohibition. Prohibition covers an inherent impossibility. And the idea is that our Western violent metaphysics is grounded on the illusion that what is prohibited is in itself possible. If we really violently break it, you will really get the incest, that it's ontologically possible. And some of my friends, Orientalist Heideggerians, and I more and more like them. You shouldn't underestimate the extent. For example, my friend Danny Postel from the United States, who is now writing a book on Iranian revolution, I think I already told you this, told me to what extent even Iranian conservatives refer to Heidegger. No? Okay, some of the people like that, they claim to be, you see, this is where in the West Heidegger was right, you miss the ontological difference, because you do not believe that the prohibited in itself impossible, which means you change the ontological absolute into an ontic entity, which then you can rape, force, violate, and so on and so on. But I think we should, it sounds horrible, I know, but I think we should remain faithful to the West here. I think that, how should I put it? I think that even if, of course, it is, the East is right. There is an illusion. But to put it in Lacanian terms, there is a real in this illusion. And to this real, we should remain faithful. And this is for me, if you want, my God, now I'm pathetic, Christian pathetic, the definition of love. Of course, love is illusory. Love is always an illusion. But it's the real of an illusion. It's an illusion to which precisely you should be faithful to the end. Okay, this, now you will say, okay, what has all this to do with Hegel? You are, okay, et tu Costas, not et tu Brugier. I think that this is the very core of Hegelian dialectics. This, how should I call it? Because that's the whole problem of Hegel's logic from the very beginning, being, nothingness, and so on. This minimal movement of how, through this minimal difference of how should I put it, the zero itself is disturbed. Now, in the remaining time, I want not yet to go to the big thing that I promised you the last time, but through a couple of examples to explain even further how, in what way the structure of Hegelian concrete universality functions. Recently I had, but I don't want to be snobbish here because I don't read novels. I just had lunch with Hanif Kureishi, the writer, and I was very, as usually, I'm a tasteless guy, I was aggressive. He told me, oh, I'm now writing a novel which is a totally different story. It's no longer this usual stuff, but it's about a writer who kills some of his closest wife, and in order to cure himself, he turns into psychoanalyst, no? So then I said in all my aggressive sarcasm, but the more you claim it will be totally different, nonetheless, you will have your usual suspects, like, I bet that the father of this hero is, again, a Pakistani failed writer, diplomat, or whatever, which is, no matter who is the Hanif Kureishi hero, his father is a Pakistani failed writer, diplomat, no? And he gave me, I must say, the right answer. He says, but what's the problem? Do we not have Pakistani failed writers as fathers? Is this not the very definition of a father is a failed Pakistani writer? No? And I think he was right, in the sense that that's Hegelian concrete universality, that there is some father, by definition, never succeeds as a father. In order to, if a successful, there was a successful father, with well-known results. It was Schreber, the father of Daniel Schreber, and you know what came with the son. Then he thought he was screwing God, all those rays. That's where you end with a. You know what I mean? The only way for you as a kid to survive is to experience, see, perceive the weakness, the humiliation, the failure of the father, and then to, if you want, very naively, to take over the task, to prolong the father's failure. In this sense, how should I put it, the exception is a rule. We don't have only, I hope you will get the shift, which is the shift of concrete universality here. It is not simply that we all have strive for an ideal father, but all our fathers fail in a specific way. No, it's rather the opposite. It's that a certain mode of failure defines the father. And on the contrary, what each of us concretely tries is to make a success out of this failure. How should I put it? That's what our careers are. You make a success if you succeed out of your father's failure. So again, here he was right. How does this function? Let me go one or rather two steps further. I'm sorry if I will again go to an example that I used in my books, but I will develop it in a different way. Let's take the most simple example. Universality subdivided into two species. What Hegel calls abstract universality would be the simple logic of universality and specific differences. Like, for example, we have films subdivided, and you will get now my point to Kieślowski. We have cinema, films are subdivided into, let's say, documentaries and fiction films. And then you can say, they share something, usually a certain narrative structure, but then you specify the difference. How would an analysis at the level of concrete universality function here? It would take over what Kieślowski did. You know what was, as I repeated in two of my books already, the same trick. Kieślowski started as a documentarist. His idea was simply to render adequately, faithfully, the dread, grey reality of communist Poland covered up by socialist official ideology. So an authentic documentary approach. But then something strange happened to him. When precisely close to what I was improvising at the beginning apropos of United 93. He discovered that if you follow this approach too far into intimacies, his example was not pornography, but in his documentary First Love from '74, the camera follows a young unmarried couple during the girl's pregnancy, delivery of the baby, and so on. The father is shown holding the newly born baby and crying. Kieślowski reacted to the obscenity of such unwarranted probing into the other's intimacy. He said, no, here there should be a trespass. His idea was that precisely if you go too far in documentary approach, you enter obscenity, and the very task that you wanted to realize, you lose it. So I hope now comes the crucial point, you will get the point, which is that precisely in order to bring to the end, to successfully fulfill the documentarist program, you have to pass into the fiction. You have to change the genre. So, the concrete universality is a name for this process through which fiction is not simply another subspecies, two types of narrative films which tell something, documentary fiction. The point is to show how fiction explodes from within documentary, for the way the emergence of fiction cinema resolves the inherent deadlock of the documentary cinema. Let me give you another example from the history of cinema. As you probably know, one of the mysteries of cinema history is the sudden eclipse of Western in the mid-1950s. Part of the answer is the fact that at the same moment, space operas did rise as a genre. So I think one should venture the hypothesis that space opera took the place of Western in the late 1950s. Again, the dialectical point here is that Western and space opera are not two subspecies of the genre adventure. One should shift the perspective and start only with Western. We start with Western. In its development, Western encounters a deadlock, and in order to survive, it has to reinvent itself as space opera. So space opera is structurally the subspecies of Western, in the same way that for Kieślowski, fiction is a subspecies of documentary. You get the point. It's not two species. It's that fiction emerges within documentary as the only way to be authentically documentary. This is the Hegelian reversal. When you try to put it in abstract terms, when you try to realize, actualize a certain notion, project, you discover that the only way to realize this notion is basically to drop it, to pass to the opposite notion. This also is how I claim in Hegel the passage from state to religion, to religious community functions. They are not simply two species of a genre, large social ideological communities. It is that state in its particular forms cannot ever resolve the deadlock inscribed into its notion to adequately represent, totalize a community. In the same way that for Kieślowski, documentary cannot adequately render the core of social reality. So the only way to do it is to pass to another notion, that of church, of course, not for us. But for Hegel, church is in this sense more state than state itself. The paradox is the same as, you know, those wonderful ethnic cliches, when sometimes one claims of some group that they are more X than X themselves. For example, the notion of misers, of people who don't want to spend money is, I don't know if it's also with you here in England, but in continental Europe it's Scotland, no? Okay, our Slovene pride is there, and that's the way we put it. We are more Scots than Scots themselves. That's incidentally our national myth of the origin of Scotland. One of us was spending too much money. We put him on a boat. He ended up in Scotland. No, but you got the point that you have some entity which no longer is, or even when I visited Iceland, I was told that that's their myth of their origin by splitting off from Norway. Norwegians are supposed to be proud, independent people. But Icelanders claim we are more Norwegians than Norwegians. That we are the Norwegians for which even Norway was too oppressive. So what happens in all these cases? Universality is here located in the enchainment or overlapping of particularities. A and B, documentary and fiction, or whatever, are not species of their encompassing universality. The point is that A, the first element, cannot fully become A, cannot actualize its notion, so in order to do it, it has to pass into B, which is formally its subspecies, but a subspecies which undermines the various species under which it is formally subsumed. So every species contains a subspecies which precisely, insofar as it effectively realizes the notion of this species, explodes its frame. Space opera is a Western at the level of its notion. And for that very reason, it's no longer a Western. So, again, I hope I got you the idea, nothing idealist in it, that this is the Hegelian, when Hegel speaks about how concrete universality develops its content through particular notions. You take a certain starting point, you develop its potentials, and it has to negate itself from within. Like, again, think about Kieślowski. He wanted to do a truly radical, honest documentary. This inherent development brought, no, I can only really do it if I pass into fiction. And so on. Maybe at some point we have to go at a different level back to documentary or whatever. But you got the point. Again, the difficult point is not to put the conflict simply at the particular level. To see how universality itself is caught into this conflict. So, to give you another example of this, how universality is caught into it, and how this is what we usually fail to perceive. Let me give you one of the spaces where precisely this failure to reflect in a properly Hegelian way is at work. Many of today's debates on choice and genetic determinism. The idea is the following one. If I cease to smoke by genetic intervention, not through my strenuous effort, does this not deprive me of my freedom of choice? So the idea is, or I don't know, if I learn something by simply taking drugs which enhance my learning ability, this is what Habermas worries about, no? That the whole notion of education is lost. You simply do it in a self-objectivized way. You don't have to do it through your effort. But I think there is a spontaneous mystification here. Let's take this, let's say we are in competition. You are more intelligent and with more will, more able to work than me. Then I cheat. In what sense? That I take some drugs either to enhance my capacity to memorize or simply to enhance my will to work. And then I work and I win over you. Now, for some people, this is first an unfair, non-fair victory, and B, it somehow deprives me of my freedom. Why? Because the very abilities that I should properly develop through my self-education, conscious effort, are simply given to me, bestowed on me through a simple chemical or maybe in future genetic intervention. Where is the mystification here? In the following, I think. If my attitude, say my desire to smoke, is just a contingent fact, I perceive it as my choice and myself as responsible for it. If, on the contrary, my ceasing to smoke is the result of a biogenetical or chemical intervention, it is as if I am deprived of my freedom, I am under control of others. That's how we perceive things. I think it's wrong, because if my ceasing to smoke is conditioned by the geneticist or chemopharmacist meddling with my genes or the chemical structure of my brain, isn't it that then my previous smoking was also determined by the previous different constellation of my genes or of my chemical substances in my body? If, on the contrary, my previous smoking was my choice, then even after the geneticist meddling, I'm still free to stop smoking, even if this now takes more or less effort. In other words, if genes determine me, then they determine me always. If their constellation is the result of natural blind chance or of the intervention of another person who changed my genome or whatever. Why then does it appear that the geneticist meddling deprives me of my freedom? I think there is only one consistent answer. If my genome depends on blind chance, then I can pretend that I am free, I can save the appearances. So, you got the point. Again, I repeat it. The point is that when we perceive it like, isn't this horrible? If you change chemicals in my body, this will change my psychiatric. For example, let's say I'm in a depression. I take a pill, I get into a better mood. Now, simply, this is horrible. My innermost psychic state is manipulated by chemicals. I'm no longer free. But wait a minute. reflect on it. If I can change your psychic disposition by chemical intervention, doesn't this prove that already before my chemical intervention, your psychic disposition was dependent on chemicals, just on different chemicals? So you were not free. You were just subordinated to a blind necessity, natural necessity of which you were not aware. So this is the typical Hegelian move. And this is, I think, where simple humanitarians like Habermas and Fukuyama don't get it. Once the intervention in the sense that by simple, direct, biological, biogenetic, chemopharmaceutic, whatever means, we can change our innermost subjective properties, which we experience as free. Once we can do it, we no longer have a choice between freedom and non-freedom. Freedom is lost. We can only a choice between maintaining the appearance of freedom or losing freedom. So the only way truly to answer it is to prove that even with biochemistry you cannot really do it. The choice, you know what I mean? The choice is not the choice between, as they put it, those who want to limit biogenetical interventions. Will we turn into automatons, into machines manipulated by biogeneticists, or will we retain our freedom? Wait a minute, if they can do it, this already means that we are not free. And this is, again, for me, the old problem where, in a strange way, these new humanitarians join. It's, for me, the ultimate tragedy that Habermas, the great enlightened guy, joins hands here with, no wonder he co-published a small volume with the new Pope, with Ratzinger, recently, no? With those, the Catholic attitude of, do not mess with it, let's prohibit. You're going too far, because, again, as I already developed in my books, isn't this the ridiculous problem? Namely, when at least many Catholics argue against biogenetic interventions, don't play with the soul, don't turn man into a machine because human soul is immortal, immaterial, and so on. My brutal, vulgar answer, if human soul is immaterial and eternal, why are you then afraid if I meddle a little bit with your brains? I mean, if it's free, it's up there. I can do whatever I want with your brains, no? I mean, something doesn't function here. It is as if the true, between the lines, Catholic strategy is a much more cynical one. Humanitarian, from a humanitarian point, may be effective but cynical. It is, we all know we are not free, but to admit this openly would have had catastrophic consequences for our ethics and so on. So, to retain the illusion of ethical autonomy, let's not probe into that. It is typical what already Nietzsche designated as the typically conservative, conservative fear of origins. Let's not probe into that. And I don't know if you read it, I think I report on it in my book that I got only one intelligent answer to this dilemma from a theological friend of mine. He almost convinced me, but didn't at the end. Namely, with a wonderful radio receiver metaphor. He told me, of course, our soul is immortal, but our brains are like radio receiver. They receive radio program, which is, in this abstract sense, immaterial, but in order to receive it, the radio had to be structured in a very precise way. So in the same way, our brain is like the perfect radio receiver created by God to receive the soul. If we mess with it, it's like breaking down the radio that, you will no longer be able to receive the immaterial program. Of course, my answer is, what about a nice new ager friend coming and telling you, wait a minute, I will change the radio so that you will receive even more programs than God allowed you to, and so on. In a Freudian day of mistakes and so on. No, how do you put it? I heard that if you go to Harley Street, that even when the doctors inform you there, sometimes they have to, that you will die, no? That they tell you in a discreet way, like the message is, I'm sorry, sir, but it happens even in the best of families that people die, no? So, okay, it happens in the best of families. Okay. So, just to conclude, 5 minutes. the next point about Hegelian universality is that, as you put it, for Hegel, universality, that's the basic idea of concrete universality, that it's literally concrete, always embedded in a situation. Universality is not given. Hegel's problem is, how does universality emerge from a particular situation? For example, to take an example of Marx, for Hegel, the problem is not, is there a universal notion of work? Like people worked in all historical epochs. Of course they did. For Hegel, the problem is, at what point, historical point, do individuals themselves perceive as having a universal capacity to work? The point when this universality becomes self-conscious. Self-conscious in the sense that it's not only that people have different occupations, but we all work, but that I myself experience my particular field of work as something ultimately contingent. It's my choice if I do this or that or whatever. And again, this is for Hegel modernity, also at the level of citizenship. That only in modernity we are citizens, we have universal human rights. Before we had certain rights, but they were always attached to our particular identity. That would be, at its minimum, for Hegel, the difference. In pre-modern space, your identity, you fit certain universality by fitting some of its subspecies. You are a good man if you do properly the particular role between the human organism. Like a wife should be a good wife, a master a good master, a child a good child, a king a good... You should fully fit your particularity. In this way, you attribute your moment of, specific moment, into a particular, into the universal harmony. For Hegel's modernity, it's exactly the opposite. Universality explodes not when you fully are what you are particularly, but when you are thwarted in that. Which is why, to return to sexuality, I read recently an interesting book. I don't know what's its theoretical status, but it must be true, as they put so nice. Elizabeth Lloyd, The Case of the Female Orgasm, which suggests that female orgasm has no positive evolutionary function. It cannot be accounted for as biological adaptation with evolutionary advantages. It's not even, her idea is that feminine organism is an appendix like male nipples, something that remained from before differentiation and it has no functions. Now, I was shocked about how many feminists exploded against this. Oh, she wants to degrade women. My God, I cannot think of more idealist, spiritual. This is spirit. Spirit is that precisely something which is thwarted in the sense of without function gets co-opted for the universal function. Universality is for Hegel a particularity thwarted in its particular function, which is why for Freud, in contrast to animal sexuality, human sexuality is universal. It's precisely because it becomes self-goal, absolutized. We don't have sex for children, but for pleasure, and so on and so on. And this, again, is for me a big enigma of how can even aren't they ashamed, those theologists who claim if you make love for pleasure only, you are animal. Sorry, but it's precisely this that animals can do it. Precisely through its limitation, through thwarting its official goal, procreation, through turning into self-goal, is that sexuality, as it were, universalizes itself. So again, I hope you get the point, which is that for Hegel, universality is not something given. It is something which always emerges through the deadlocks of the particular. Let's take again cinema. You have documentary cinema, it's thwarted, it fails. So you have to expand it into fiction, which then creates a larger universal notion of something encompassing documentary and fiction. You got it that Hegel is here very materialist. The starting point is always the self-blockade, the failure of the particular to be what it is. So it's exactly the opposite of the traditional pseudo-Platonist view with Plato in Parmenides. It's more complex, where it looks as if ideally you are universal, and then the more you get into conflicts, confusion, the more you are particular. No, at the particular level, everything is at its place. But when the particular gets thwarted, twisted, displaced, out of joint, at that point, universality explodes. And I'm sorry, I was tired today because of all this confusion, so at that point, I explode today and disappear. I'm sorry for these confusions. I will take, the Stalinist solution is, I know when you have human rights, one Stalinist communist said that if you violate human rights in a certain prison, well, kill all the prisoners and there will be no humans to have human rights, so everything will be okay. So in this sense, I will apply this Stalinist wisdom, and I will not show you any movie clips in 2 days, so there will be no problems. So I did this, the real stuff, so from here, concrete universality, in 2 days, I promise that I really go to, sorry?
I would like to address the sort about Buddhism. I think you made a strategic mistake about Buddhism. I think you made a mistake about Buddhism, which I would like to address.
Sorry, no, wait a minute, wait.
Do you want to go on?
No, I would not have an hour, but...
Very briefly, I think you made 3 mistakes. First, you spoke of Buddhism in terms of questions of primal being and of the form. And I think in doing that, you conflated categories of thought critically. You used ideas developed from Judeo-Christian images of the form, where ultimate being is personified, where in Buddhism, ultimate being is seen as transcendent of thought. And you also spoke of mysticism as fundamentally envisaging the nature of primal being. Western mysticism is fundamentally transcendental, as Buddhism is. It's only in some cases of Jewish mysticism that you find concepts of the notion of primal being. Then secondly, it's not true that nirvana means the end of growth. The Buddha and other Buddhist adepts continue to grow after nirvana.
Yeah.
And thirdly, in terms of action and enlightenment, Buddhism is not only about meditation. It's
About
action to gain enlightenment. And the Tibetan Book of the Dead is not a central Buddhist text.
Which one?
It is
It's not central.
It is not.
Which was not the central text?
The Tibetan Book of the Dead, which you quoted as a book you read, is not a central Buddhist text.
I know that.
Tibetan Buddhism. You need to look at the source text, such as the 1000 of Minareka by Gamachan, or Nagarjuna's Maya Kamarika. If you read those source texts, you understand better the complexity of Buddhist thought.
It may surprise you. My God, wait, I have here, quarter of an hour to do this. Of course, I'm aware of this. What I'm only saying is, with all respect for Buddhism, is first, don't reproach me for things which I openly admit. I mean, I openly admit that my starting point is, if you want to put it in this way, Judeo-Christian. Point 2, how should I put it? I think that I know, but you know that you were caught now into the same trap that you reproached me with. For example, you used the term transcendental. I doubt very much if you can use this term for Oriental thought. Transcendental is for me something so specific. Transcendental, as we know, is opposed to transcendent and so on with Kant. But my basic point is that, yes, I know it's not primordial reality, it's the same, and so on and so on. But okay, then, not now. Maybe we can go on with pleasure in 2 days. Then give me a clear answer. Why, how did we, not fall into, how did we end up in the way we are? Yeah, that's what I thought. That is the answer I always get.
Can I advise you on that at the end of this Masterclass series, Slavoj will have an extra 2 hours in which he will just discuss people's point of view and questions and so on. So then next week or next Thursday, you can come back, but also collect questions and points of view for a later session. Thanks very much.